picture this. You watched our last video on this topic, and you're still trash. Last season, you finished in Master 2, and this season, well, you got a little bit better, but you got all the way to Master 3. You want to get better, but you don't know where to look. Well, today's your lucky day. After part 1 of this series, we got so many requests on more tips on how to get better at Clash Royale, and we're giving people what they want. So without further ado, here are 8 more tips on how to actually get good at Clash Royale. Our first tip is to play a low skill deck. We talk about this on the channel a lot, but there are many decks that you're going to have much more success with just because they're easier to use than others. There are many decks like Hog Rider that are going to take slightly more skill than a deck like Golem. It's just much more difficult to use, and you're never going to make it to the top of the ladder unless you're a very good player. A skill 4 in Clash Royale is the base level success that you'll have with a certain deck. If you're bad with Hog Rider, you are going to be absolutely terrible. Like, bottom of the barrel, worst in the game terrible. If you're bad with a Golem deck, you can still have success. You'll still win many games just because of how easy it is to use Golem. Can you put a Golem behind the tower and then put a couple troops behind it? You're gonna win multiple games. And I'm gonna have all these pro level Golem players sitting here in my DMs just screaming at me, telling me that they're better than me. I mean, I don't really care if you're better than me. All you do is drop 5 cards in the back and then win a game. It takes a ton of time to master a deck in Clash Royale. This is especially true for some of these higher skill decks, like your Hog Rider, like some of your cycle decks that are easier to use, like split lane decks and beatdown decks, are going to take much less time. They might not have the highest results ceiling, but they do have a very high skill floor, meaning that you're going to have success even though you might not get to the absolute tippy top of the game. The odds are you weren't going to reach that results ceiling anyways because it's going to take way too much time to do so. Just cut your losses and get a high skill floor deck. You'll have a ton more success. We've already made a full long form video on a deck that I think would be very good for many of those newer players. It is a Royal Recruits bait deck, but other decks that you can use if you don't want to use Royal Recruits bait, you can use Golem, Lava Hound, Electro Giant. All those decks take very, very low amounts of skill to get good success with them. My second tip is to prioritize your upgrades. We've already talked about only using one deck in the other video, but we're going to talk about only upgrading the specific cards inside of your deck in this video. You need to make sure that you are not upgrading other cards that are outside of your deck. Gold is a very valuable resource, especially at the beginning of the game. Once you get towards the end of the game, it's not near as valuable, but at the beginning, it is huge. If you have a whole bunch of other cards upgraded inside of your account that aren't in your deck, they're doing absolutely nothing for you. This is a really common mistake we see inside of our clan and just other people in the game doing. This might be a hot take here, but card levels mean much more than the cards inside of your deck. You might completely hard counter someone in mid ladder, but if your cards are 5 levels under what your opponent's cards are, you're gonna lose. This is why when you see pro level players come down into mid ladder for a video, they still lose games because their cards are 5 levels under what their opponent's cards are. If you're trying to use a Knight or a Valkyrie to defend your opponent's Mega Knight, you can't really do anything about it if their Mega Knight is 5 levels higher than your Knight or Valkyrie. Usually your Knight or Valkyrie is able to tank those shots from the Mega Knight, and you're able to use other troops to kill the Mega Knight while they're tanking those shots. You can't really do this when the Mega Knight is able to kill your Knight or Valkyrie in like 4 shots. Make sure that you are upgrading your deck as fast as possible. Do not worry about any other cards. The third tip is to make sure you're collecting all your rewards. This might sound absolutely obvious, but I've sat here and seen multiple people do this, especially my girlfriend. I'll get on her account and she'll have 70 rewards sitting there for her. Like, how do you ever expect to upgrade any kind of cards? How do you expect to advance in the game in any way if you're not accepting any of the rewards you're getting from Supercell? Supercell doesn't give you a whole bunch of rewards, so why are you not accepting the ones that they give you? Make sure that you're getting all the rewards for the season shop. You need to make sure you're getting the evolution shards every single month. After that, you need to get the legendary wild cards. You need to make sure that you're looking around on Reddit and online to see what the most valuable rewards are every single month. Usually someone will put a chart of what the most valuable rewards are in the season shop every month. It is definitely possible to max out a deck being a free-to-play player. You just have to be very consistent on collecting the free rewards that you get from Supercell. The fourth tip is to make sure you're not overcommitting on offense. This is a tip that you will learn very, very well the further you get into the game. Depending on the deck you're playing, you need to make sure that you have enough elixir to defend your opponent's push. I see this happen all the time with newer players. They think, oh, I'm pushing right now. I have 4 elixir left. I need to throw this hog rider at the bridge, or I need to throw this mini P.E.K.K.A at the bridge to try to take their tower. This means if they throw a hog rider backside, there's nothing you can do about it. Your tower's gone because you have 0 elixir left to try to defend it. There are some pushes that you just gotta be able to let them go. There are many pushes that aren't gonna go completely to plan. They're not going to be able to take an entire tower. You're not even going to get 1,000 damage on most of your pushes. Especially players that just started the game. You're going to have to be able to look back on your game. And if you lost a game, you're going to have to watch, and I bet you 90% of the time, there is at least one point in that game that you overcommitted on a push, and that was probably the reason why you lost the game. The 5th tip is the opposite of the last tip. It's overcommitting on defense. When you're playing defense and defending your opponent's push, you have to make sure you have enough elixir to either have a counter push or to defend the backside if your opponent's going to throw something backside. I bet you see this on YouTube all the time. You're watching pro level players refusing to take any damage, but even they sometimes will just take damage because they know that they're going to gain an elixir lead and they're going to be able to have a counter push going the other way that will completely destroy their opponent's tower. When you see them not taking damage, it does cause an issue inside of your head. You're going to be watching that and you're going to be thinking like, oh, they're not taking any damage, so I shouldn't take any damage in my games either. You got to remember that these guys are pro level players. They are the best players in the game. You are not going to be able to do that. I can't do that. You will not be able to do that either. You have to be able to take damage. You can't just spend 13 elixir to stop a 8 elixir push and then think that that's a good thing because you didn't take any damage. You just took a -5 trade right there. A -5 elixir trade. If that happens twice in a game, you're done. You lost the game. That means your opponent is up 10 elixir, which, just think about that. That's like a giant and an executioner coming down your lane and you can't defend that. Just make sure that your defenses make sense. Not only will you not be able to counter push if you spend too much elixir on defense, but your opponent is just going to gain a massive elixir lead and he's going to completely run you over by the end of the game. The 6th tip is to understand your matchups. When you're playing a deck, you have to know what matchups are good and what matchups are bad. You need to know how to play a matchup against a specific deck and how to play a matchup against other decks. When you're playing with a graveyard, you're going to play against a deck with a poison or a mother witch different than you're going to play against a hog rider deck. When you're playing a bad matchup against a deck with like a mother witch, you're going to have to play that completely different than any other deck. You can't just put a bar barrel at the bridge and then graveyard because they're going to put a mother witch in the back and you're going to have 30,000 hogs coming back your way. It's not going to be fun. You're going to get absolutely destroyed. You can put a bar barrel graveyard when you're playing against most matchups though. That is a viable strategy most of the time, and it will get a ton of damage most of the time. But if they're playing with a specific deck, you're going to get absolutely crushed. For you lower level players, when you're playing with your giant decks, if your opponent doesn't have a mini P.E.K.K.A, you're going to be able to be much more aggressive with your giant. You can spam your giant at the bridge with goblins behind it. You can spam your giant at the bridge with a musketeer. You can spam your giant with a mini P.E.K.K.A. If they have their mini P.E.K.K.A in their hand or in their deck, you're going to have to be much more careful doing that kind of stuff. You just have to make sure if your opponent has specific cards inside of their deck that you're going to play a specific way. The bad part about this game is that everyone gets bad matchups sometimes. There are some times you're going to be playing a deck that completely hard counters your deck and there's nothing really you can do about it. The good thing is that everybody makes mistakes. Everyone's going to make at least 1 or 2 mistakes until you get to the tippy top of ladder. If you're able to capitalize on your opponent's mistakes, you're going to be able to win these matchups sometimes. Just be careful, play patiently, and wait for your opponent to mess up and you will win some of these games. The next tip is to use the same exact tower troop. Do not change your tower troop from the princess tower troop. Even if there is a better tower troop that comes out, especially because there is a new tower troop coming out in April, you have to realize that you have to stick with the same one. If you change your tower troop, there is going to be new interactions with every single card and every single evolution inside of the game. That is over 100 new interactions that you have to learn. On top of that, every single tower troop gets upgraded like every single card does. Card levels are very, very important, and tower troops are just as important as card levels, if not more important. This is actually hurting me saying this because every single deck I use is drastically better against the Cannoneer than it is against the Princess Tower. So it's hurting me telling you this. But using the Princess Tower that you already have leveled up is going to help you drastically more in the long run. I know that you guys have been seeing most of the pro players be using Cannoneer lately. A lot of high ladder uses Cannoneer. but a lot of them still use the Princess Tower. You need to keep using the Princess Tower. You know those interactions drastically better than the Cannoneer. They can sit there and play Clash Royale 24/7. You don't, and even if you do, you're still trash if you're a low ladder and play Clash Royale 24/7. You are not a pro. Do not change your tower troop. Please. The next tip is to set goals in Clash Royale. You're never going to know if you're getting better at the game unless you're setting goals for you to reach. Winning a classic challenge is a great first goal. To win a classic challenge, you have to win 12 games before you lose 3 games. This is a great goal because you're probably going to play 2 very good players, 2 or 3 very good players along your way in that challenge, but most of the people that you're going to play are around your skill level. If you're able to beat 1 or 2 of those really good players, you're going to be able to win the challenge. Once you win a classic challenge, you're well on your way to getting to Ultimate Champion once you get a max deck. Once you hit Ultimate Champion, you're on your way to getting a top 10k finish. You're on your way to maybe even winning a grand challenge. Even if you get stuck in Ultimate Champion and never get any higher, don't get into the top 10k, don't win that grand, you're still better than 95% of players. You gotta remember that most players are stuck in like Masters League, or they're not even in a league at all. You being an Ultimate Champion means that you're drastically better than most other players. You got to remember that most of the people at the very tip top of the game sit there and play 24/7. I would say the best place to sit is right below that. If you can get to the top of ladder right before you get to all the pros, you know that you've made it in the game without sacrificing a huge part of your life to do it. So there you guys have it. If you have any of your own tips, leave them down below and maybe we can make a part 3 happen.